What if the conversations we've been told to avoid are the ones we need the most? What if we have become so afraid of offending people that we've stopped asking better questions?
Because growth doesn't come from staying comfortable. It comes from questioning assumptions, challenging ideas, and being willing to hear perspectives that aren't your own.
Some conversations will make you uncomfortable. Some will challenge what you believe. Some might even change your mind.
Listen, we're not here to tell you what to think. We're here to ask better questions, to explore different perspectives, and to have the conversations most people avoid.
No scripts, no echo chambers, no sugarcoating. Just honest conversations about leadership, relationships, business, health, money, culture, and what it really means to live well in a complicated world.
And hey, you don't have to agree with everything you hear, but if every episode leaves you thinking long after it's over, we've done our job.
You're listening to Let's Not Sugarcoat It. Let's get into it. Welcome back to season 4 of Let's Not Sugarcoat It. Today, we're joined by Kirsten Davidson, founder of Mind the Gap Psychotherapy and a registered psychotherapist based in Burlington, Ontario. Kirsten works with individuals, couples, and families, helping people navigate anxiety, trauma, relationship challenges, identity, and life transitions. Her work blends evidence-based psychology with approaches like internal family systems, somatic therapy, attachment theory, and mindfulness, all centered around one idea: the stories we believe about ourselves shape the lives we live. So, Kirsten also hosts the Mind the Gap podcast, where she challenges people to question the assumptions they hold about themselves and the world around them. She believes growth doesn't come from staying comfortable. It comes from becoming curious enough to explore the gaps between what we think we know and what's actually true. So today we're going to explore healing, identity, relationships, high achievement, trauma, accountability, and the uncomfortable truth that can ultimately set us free. So welcome, Kirsten, to the show.
Thank you so much, Bella and Lee, for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So tell us a little bit more about how you got into this work.
I knew I wanted to be a therapist since I was in high school. So I followed that path from probably about age 14 onwards and been super passionate about psychology, philosophy, nature of mind since I was little. And so I'm rare in that sense. You could say that I kind of knew and just went with it. At one point, I thought I wanted to be an architect, but then realized you have to be good at math, and physics is not my thing, but I am artistic. You see the paintings behind me for viewers that are watching the video. Those are mine. So I do have a creative side as well. But I've always just been so fascinated by our human ability to reflect on ourselves. I've also gone through a lot of changing family dynamics throughout my life. So lots of remarriages and step siblings, moving houses, lots of noticing and observing familial dynamics and relational dynamics. So for me, there's also, of course, there's the academia piece, but there's also just the lived experience piece. And I think that helps me most in my work.
Okay, awesome. I have a question. So if you had 5 minutes with the entire world and couldn't worry about offending anyone, what's one truth about being human everyone needs to hear right now?
What a great question. One truth everyone needs to hear is, this is a little bit controversial, diagnostics for mental health are basically a westernized, feeble attempt at trying to make sense of the complexity of the human experience. There are no genetic markers for things like depression, anxiety. There are some predispositions, but like the way we interact with our environment changes and shapes us. And we have the ability, we're so flexible, we have the ability to undo responses to things and the way that we think we are, the way we think we show up. Yeah, we're so flexible. So I know that would offend some people probably who are very tied to a label. Like, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have ADHD. But, I can confidently say now with all the research that's out, there's lots of thinkers like me who know that this is just not this is not as simple as, you go to the doctor, you have a broken arm, you get treatment for that broken arm. It's way more complex. And we have the ability to heal ourselves. That's the good news that comes from all this, is that we're not stuck.
Yeah, I like that, because you talk about these diagnostic tools. I used to think, even when you have those like personality tools, you get to like tell you what color you are, right? Like when you do those types of things, they tell you that you are something. You're red or you're green. And then it used to feel like, I am that. Like you just said, taking a tool and you find, oh, you have anxiety. Okay, so now I am that. Well, really, it's just an awareness tool. Every change, every transformation comes from the basis of being aware first. And so I think, to your point, maybe, actually, before I make a statement, maybe it's a question, is because you mentioned that the diagnostic tool is being very feeble. So is it that the tool itself is not robust enough, or is it more of just the perspective of the tool being, the tool's fine as long as it's used through a lens of bringing awareness to, this is where you're at, and now you know where you're at. Here's the path to change, and that path to changing is what's missing and what makes it feeble. Or is it more of just the tool itself?
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I would say both. So the tool, it's not robust enough because the label, let's just go with depression, like the label major depressive disorder includes a list of criteria you must meet to say that you have this disorder. So two things. One, in my opinion, the list is not exhaustive enough. And in some ways it's too exhaustive. So it's very subjective and it's tried to be made objective. And then in terms of application, that use of the word, I have this, versus I am experiencing depression. Very subtle, but very important. Depression is real. Like, I am experiencing depression, or I am experiencing anxiety. The same way we'd say, I'm experiencing happiness. You wouldn't say, like, I have happiness, right? So this adoption of I have it, it's mine, it's this thing to be possessed, it's where things can get a little bit messy.
So has therapy become a place where people heal, or a place where people learn how to justify staying the same? Because honestly, going to therapy, we both did therapy individually and as a couple. At some point, I felt that we were stuck in this loop, and we're rehashing and just saying, yes, this is where we are, and we weren't moving forward. And once we stepped away, we made that conscious choice to explore different types of healing, like meditation, breath work. Yeah, just seeing different practitioners. It's when we move the needle forward. Do you feel like at some point therapy becomes a place where people just justify their situation?
Yeah. I want to add to that, because I think when you do the therapy, sometimes you can have people that, I don't know if it's like revisiting whatever has you with the therapist, like to see the therapist, if it's some type of a trauma or event or something that's happened. Maybe it allows you to maybe feel connected to yourself, or maybe provides you a sense of significance. Like, it's not always the sense of victimhood. I think sometimes it's easy for us to say, oh, people are playing victim, but sometimes it can be deeper than that. It's more that, it's filling a need of some type, which then allows that, like your question is saying, that therapy is just sometimes not moving the needle.
Yeah, that relational piece is so important. The sense of safety and connectedness with a therapist, just to acknowledge what you're saying there, Lee. And then Bella, your question around, is it a place where people can sometimes stay on loop and get stuck? I feel that is the therapist's responsibility to acknowledge. So if someone is stuck and on loop, not that the therapist has control over the client breaking the loop, but if the same thing keeps coming up and the same patterns are showing up and there's no movement there, I think that is up to the therapist to take a look at themselves and their intervention and say, have I had the courage yet to name what I'm seeing here? To even speak to the client about that I'm seeing this pattern, I'm not seeing movement for you. Can we try something different? And maybe totally shift the approach. Get curious about what's happening outside of the therapy room too. because it's not all going to be wrapped up in those 50-minute sessions. And then also, like, you're naming some breath work and other interventions. As a therapist, having the humility to say, yes, use those other tools. Not everything's going to happen here unless you're also a therapist that is a breathwork facilitator and doing all of those other holistic practices in session. Because, like, so I'm an integrative psychotherapist, so I'm using a bunch of different modalities. But with that holistic approach, I'm also talking a lot about what are you doing outside of this room to maintain what we're doing. So long and the short of it is, if people are feeling stuck, then either the intervention has reached a wall and maybe other interventions need to be introduced, or there hasn't really been much intervention at all and it's been mostly talking. So I've heard this a lot, talk therapy. I feel like that umbrella term sometimes gives a bad reputation to therapy, because technically, like, we are talking and we are doing therapy, but we're also applying a lot of interventions in session. Not every therapist does that. Some therapists are more just a reflector.
Right. I like that, because I think sometimes it's easy for us to think that from a therapist's point of view, it's probably easy to think, oh, this person's just not getting it or not moving on. But I like how you kind of pointed it to the, like, what does a therapist maybe need to move through to make sure that they are respectfully and in the right way kind of challenging the process to make sure that you're in service of your client, versus them just coming back. And the difference between needing to stay in one spot, sometimes you don't want to rush through things too fast, but then at some point you get, okay, it's time for us to move on. Or even, like, we've experienced this where, whether it's a different intervention, as you said it, or sometimes you just need to realize that, okay, this relationship with this therapist has reached its limits. And in order for me to move on, maybe I need to find someone else. And that's okay too, right? I think at some point, relationship can outgrow itself and you need to be able to find someone else. We talk about basically getting on the court, not just in that 50-minute session, but outside of the 50-minute session where life is really happening. What are some of those, like, interventions or practices that you find are really beneficial for people? And I know we're talking about relationships, and I think it could be either like in a romantic relationship, like a marriage or something, or even just in a relationship with yourself, right? Because I think both play a part in healthy relationships. So what are some of those key things that really, really matter?
Broader answer, lifestyle. So what are we doing in our downtime? What are we doing at work? How are we taking care of ourselves? How are we taking care of our partners? Basically just that whole self-care umbrella is something to look at. How much sleep are we getting? These are questions I ask couples and individuals in a first session, just to get a sense of what's your activity level, all the same kind of questions you get asked in a doctor's office, because, to me, that not even just to me, but it's something I really am passionate about as a therapist. We have to look at how the lifestyle factors are influencing mental health, kind of coming back to the diagnostics model for a moment. Someone who is depressed, it would be unsurprising to learn that they're sleeping for a very long time each day, or that they're barely getting any sleep at all. Someone with anxiety, it would be unsurprising to learn that they are maybe eating a lot of or not enough food to help calm their nervous system, and to be making sure the nutrients they're getting are supporting a calm nervous system. So very holistic in the questions I'm asking. Then in terms of, how do we implement stuff in session, outside of session? There's a lifestyle piece, but mindfulness is my main tool. So mindfulness really requires that we slow down and we get curious about our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our actions, instead of running on autopilot. That's something we do in therapy, and that's the one thing I always am encouraging clients to translate outside of therapy, because we move in a culture that's so fast too. Like, how can we make the most of the day? How can we do things, like accomplish things faster? It's always about efficiency, but sometimes moving fast actually slows us down in terms of our own, like, psychological development and, like, deepening relationships. And so just getting really slow and getting really curious about your partner, yourself, that fosters so much self-awareness.
Do you think that the mindfulness, the awareness piece is maybe paying attention to the environment that you're in when it comes to the speed? Because I immediately agreed with you, because I feel like, and I know I can speak for Bella as well. Our environment is very much built to be very fast paced. So for us, slowing things down, being very intentional about slowing things down is very important. But as you were mentioning, I was kind of thinking, I wonder if there are certain individuals out there where their environment that they're in is actually having the opposite effect, where it actually has them moving a little slower through life, where maybe what they need is not to slow things down, but maybe they need to kind of speed things up a little bit. Maybe like taking action faster. And the fact that they're not because the environment isn't conducive to that is causing them issues.
Yeah. That's such a good distinction between like the slow life versus the fast pace, like what's next type of lifestyle. And when I'm talking about slowing down, I'll clarify that the slowing down is really a requirement to first notice how we're feeling and thinking. So the slowing down can be as simple as like you're actually moving fast, you're doing something that is fast paced, but you're taking a beat in your head, like you are slowing down internally. And it doesn't always have to look like a literal slowing down. You're slowing down internally to notice, what am I doing? What am I doing right now? Right? You know, when you're driving and you get from one place to the next and you don't even remember how that happened. So it's a shift. I'm operating subconsciously. How do I turn on the conscious brain and bring some awareness to what's happening right now? And so the same thing would apply for someone who is moving slowly through life. We need them to get conscious to move faster.
Get out of autopilot.
So let's say I'm just going to go back to the loopy part, the loop you're stuck in. I'm curious because it's been on my mind. What is the difference? Like, how do you approach it differently as a psychotherapist versus a psychologist versus like a counselor? Do you know what I mean? Like, what are the different tools that each does? Because how do you know who you need to go and see? Who would go see a psychotherapist versus a psychologist or like a counselor?
Yeah, and such a great question, one that's so important and I think doesn't get talked about enough is that distinction between like psychiatry, psychotherapy, psychology, counselors. And the brief explanation is it's basically a difference in education and academia, you know, the letters you have behind your name. When you're sitting with a therapist, you're sitting with their letters, but you're also sitting with them as a human. And so it's so complicated because we could say, so I'll just start from the top in terms of most traditional and most medicalized, and then like less traditional and a little bit more on the holistic side of things. So top of the chain there would be psychiatry, which is more in line with traditional medicine, Western medicine specifically. And so a psychiatrist is much less focused generally on talk therapy, on communication. They're more focused on identifying symptoms, identifying a disorder, and prescribing medication. And so that kind of falls for me into the category of someone who's struggling with something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, where maybe talk therapy is not going to be as effective. And then we would have a psychologist who has done their doctorate. So they have a PhD. You can do your doctorate in clinical psychology, counseling psychology. So this is where it gets kind of complicated. There's so many avenues there. But yeah, that type of designation, they then have the ability to diagnose. They do not prescribe medication. And their approach, again, from my experience and the research I've done, tends to be a little bit more clinical, a little bit more medicalized, just in terms of how can we use these diagnostic models to then treat a patient accordingly. So we're still a little bit back in time in terms of the therapist is in the seat of power and the client is like the patient. Then we have psychotherapy. That's where I'm in. I'm a little bit biased, as you can tell. But in the seat of the psychotherapist office, it's very focused on the relational aspect. There is no power differential, you would hope. Again, everyone's individual. So I know some lovely psychologists that bring a holistic approach to psychology, the same way there are some psychotherapists that are a little bit more rigid. But the hope is with psychotherapy that we are focusing more on just how flexible the client is and how therapists themselves should go to therapy, and really just breaking down barriers and not using labels, focusing on the lived experience of the client, and also really just empowering how flexible they are to be able to change that through talk therapy, through intervention in that way.
Because honestly, when I read your credentials of psychotherapy, I imagined a chair with all the things on the head, because just the word itself does that defer clients to come in? Because if I was going, I'm going to see a psychotherapist, then like your shirt that says my wife is hot with the psychotic in between the hot part, do you find there is a bit of stigma around the word psychotherapy?
I feel that I totally depends on where we're coming from culturally and then sociologically. So for me, I didn't even know psychotherapy was an option when I was doing my undergraduate degree. I thought clinical psychology was the only route. I thought being a psychologist was the only route. And then my eyes got open to this other world of psychotherapy. So as you say that, I'm recalling back to the first time I learned about it. I also was like, what's the difference between a psychotherapist and a psychologist? I think nowadays, to be honest, a lot of people that reach out have the same question you do and are just kind of like, I don't care what your title is. I just need to sit with someone. I need to work through what I need to work through. And so psychologists and psychotherapists tend to be regarded more in the same field versus psychiatry. That very prescription focused model is a bit on the outskirts. So not to my knowledge, no one has stereotyped in that way, but I'm sure people have.
Going back, you said people just want to sit and say, I want to work through this. So what emotions do people spend the most energy trying not to feel?
That's a great question. Anxiety, sadness. Those are the first two that come to mind for sure. A lot of avoidance around sadness, a lot of avoidance around anxiousness. Probably sadness would be the biggest one though.
I want to try avoid anger, but it's not, I'm not, because, with perimenopause, there's a lot of things that are going on in a woman's body and we're changing. And speaking to a lot of my girlfriends who are also in that stage of life of perimenopause, just the anger, the rage, that rage within us that we haven't had.
I wonder if that emotion is a way of not dealing with other emotions. Not to be a therapy session.
Oh, but we can turn into one.
No, I love it. It's true. I mean, anger is technically a secondary emotion, meaning there's something underlying it, and the thing underlying it is most often sadness. But anger is what gets released. And I believe in healthy anger, healthy sadness. There's an optimal level of every emotion. And of course, at different phases and stages of life, those are going to take the front seat. And that's more of a, anger is that knee-jerk reaction, right? But sometimes it's important to release as long as it's in a healthy way.
Maybe we need to put in you can go to those rage rooms where you can smash
those are
things.
Awesome.
Maybe we need to put one of those in the house.
Yeah, no problem. Send me down to the dungeon and I'll rage all day. I think, when you said that, it does, a lot of it comes, I feel for myself, is just not being heard, seen and heard. That's,
Yeah, or maybe even understood.
Yeah, pretty much understood. Yeah. So.
Based on everything that you're going through, understood. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now you can ask your question. Moving right along. We're not turning this into a session.
Do you find that more people are starting to seek therapy proactively, or is it still very much they've been suffering in something, right? With anxiety or problems with a relationship, and they're kind of at a rock bottom. Everyone's rock bottom is different, but they just get to a point where they're I don't know what else to do, and so they feel like it's a last resort. Is it still a lot of that? Because I feel like that's typically when people tend to go to therapy because of the stigma around it, or is there more people starting to be more proactive?
On average, it is a little bit more reactive. So that last resort, or there's a crisis. I will say I've been pleasantly surprised within the past couple of years at the amount of proactive clients. So that's wonderful to see. I think that's a result of everyone kind of cracking down on the narrative that you have to be crazy to go to therapy, and how, therapists are talking about how they go to therapy. And we're really working hard to normalize that everyone should have a therapist the same way everyone should have a doctor and a dentist. Right. Just really trying to normalize it. So I'm seeing a shift, which is wonderful. I will say that couples and families, I have never worked with a couple or a family who has come to me proactively. It's almost always in crisis.
I mean, that's how we ended up in therapy.
Yeah,
Through
is
crisis.
through crisis. Yeah,
Yeah.
through breakdown.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a belief that in order for there to be breakthroughs, typically there has to be some form of breakdown that needs to occur. But I believe that the breakdown can be intentional, right? I think a lot of the time breakdowns is unintentional, and that's where you kind of hit your rock bottom versus, okay, I'm going to seek the breakdown, and the breakdown is going to be with facing kind of those, doing some of that shadow work, finding those, parts of my identity, the way that I believe myself to be with myself in a relationship, and then work through those and cause that breakdown to occur. What are some things that, let's say a couple or a family dynamic could be looking for inside of that relationship to determine, hey, you know what, maybe we need to go see some therapy proactively before this becomes a bigger problem and that breakdown is occurring outside of our control instead of, within our control.
I like how you say you can create the breakdown and that it doesn't have to be coming from outside. It can come from within, like you get curious about what's going on. And I think that's really it, is how can we be proactive, is back to the mindfulness piece, noticing when there is an argument, when there is a conflict, because even if we're not at quote unquote rock bottom, there's always conflict. There's always an argument. Like there's no couple, unless they're two very, very highly avoided individuals, that not have some form of conflict at some point in time. So it's just getting curious about what happens when that happens. Like, what is our pattern in the conflict? What's our pattern in communication when there's a misunderstanding or an argument? And even if they're few and far between, you can say, I don't like how that's going, and I don't really know if we have the tools to fix that. Maybe we should talk to someone. So it's noticing, the paper cut before it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's saying, this is something that's happened, and I don't want this to be a thing. I don't want this to be our lives.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for people to look in the mirror a lot of the time when we're looking at, creating that breakdown for ourselves. It usually is looking at ourselves in the mirror and going, this part of me is not ideal. This is what's causing me to not move forward. Because a lot of people want to blame the external, right? This person did this to me. This situation happened. How did we contribute to our own, not demise, but our own life? Because really we are in control of our happiness, our sadness. We are in control of our emotions. Sometimes we may feel we're out of control because the rage comes and you just want to, not going to say the words, but we are in control of our lives, our happiness. But we tend to look for the outside to make whole or blame for our situations. How do you go about reflecting or putting that mirror in front of somebody and say, actually, this is where you need to work?
I think it's easy for everybody to always, pick up the magnifying glass when there's conflict. And we always say when you pick up the magnifying glass, that's your awareness to go put it down, pick up the mirror. But obviously in conflict, there's always two parts. And so if you're looking in the mirror, but the other person isn't, how do you kind of encourage the other person or engage the person so that you're helping them see their parts as well?
Yeah, that magnifying glass versus mirror thing. I love it. I use metaphors all the time. So I'll quote you guys on that one. I love it. Yeah, it's important. It all comes down to accountability and humility. And you guys are right. If one person is ready to go there and the other isn't, it can make it really hard to meet each other in the middle. And so my role as a couples therapist in those moments is to, as you're saying, be the one that's holding up the mirror while doing the dance of also advocating and validating for the person that I'm holding the mirror up for, because we never want them to feel cornered, attacked, blamed. I can't control, like the ego might still take hold and they might feel that way, and I can't protect against that. But the softness in which you can do that, I think is something I've developed over time, also through lived experience. But it's holding the mirror up, acknowledging what they're doing and saying it quite factually, like, here's what I'm seeing, and you can tell me if that resonates or not. And also, I can understand why you're having that response. So validating them at the same time as pointing out the behavior that might not be so great. And what I find in those moments is the person that maybe has been okay taking accountability is like, yes, like that's what I've been saying. And it's like, okay, how have you been telling him or her that though? Like, have you been yelling it at? Now we're going to hold the mirror up to the other person. So it's such a dance, and for me, it's so fun, and it's so like interesting to see the dynamic shift. And I also get really curious about what would it mean for both of you to admit that you messed up? Like, what is the fear around being wrong? Because that's a big thing in conflict.
Yeah. We like to remind ourselves all the time that the reason why anybody gets into a relationship with another person, it's not because you want the other person to lose, right? It's you're attracted to them. You want them to win. And so if there's conflict, the conflict isn't a indication that the other person wants you to lose. And so I used to believe as an avoidant, is that conflict in a relationship was a bad thing, especially because growing up when I was a kid, conflict was very unhealthy in my household. And so I was always avoiding it. Any type of conflict would be like, oh, this is a problem. But then learning that conflict is actually the opportunity to create more depth inside of a relationship, because it's not about the conflict itself. It's about how you work through it, and realizing that most of the time, there are sometimes the odd occasion. Most of the time, conflict is usually some form of someone's needs not being met. And then that's the opportunity to kind of figure out, what is the need? How can I show up in a way that helps you meet those needs? And then realizing that if you're able to look at the mirror first before using the magnifying glass, that allows you to take that accountability for your parts, which then creates the only opportunity to really enroll the other person to do the same.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you start with the magnifying glass, then the other person's automatically going to be on the defense. So before we move on to the next question, I just want to say, for those listening, if you're thinking about a time in your relationship where there was some conflict and you're getting the awareness, but you're not quite sure where to go next from a tool perspective, I think that is a great indicator that, hey, maybe we should go, find a therapist of some type to learn those tools. And that if your partner is not somebody who is yet willing to do that, that's okay. Go and find an individual therapist and start learning those tools yourself, so you can start deploying them and applying them in the relationship, because that's also going to give you the best chance to encouraging that person then to eventually wanting to do the same, because they'll see the difference in the change.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely an opportunity to reach out.
Okay, well, I'd like to kind of shift a little bit gears in terms of, social media, and so many people out there that are claiming to be relationship coaches and marriage coaches and so on and so forth. How much damage are they causing, or do you feel like they're adding value to society? Because social media is so huge now, and there's so many different conflicting approaches or views. Is that making your job more difficult, or do you feel like people are becoming more aware of themselves because of social media?
Yeah, very relevant question for sure. I love it. So in my work, I would say that I am personally and professionally not dealing with the potential repercussions of all that, because if an individual's decided to come see me, they're also likely not engaging with a relationship coach or someone like claiming to have certain credentials they don't. But I will say that I have heard of individuals who this has been the case for them, or people who have been, as you're saying, Bella, made aware of something that they might be experiencing from an influencer online or someone who's a coach. I think the awareness piece is really lovely in terms of an individual deciding to take it on and say, I want to bring awareness to this issue maybe that I struggled with. And that's something I notice with a lot of coaches is that they've been through the thing and they want to impart this knowledge onto others. And I think in terms of like just sheer awareness and validation, that can be helpful. But then when it comes to intervention, that's where we want to be cautious around, are these people, and this is what I see a lot, are these individuals usually totally well-intentioned? Are they giving a lot of advice and very like strong directives on what you need to do, what you should do, what you shouldn't do? Therapy is not that. No one is going to, if someone asks me, I need you to fix me, I need you to give me a blueprint of my life plan. We're not personal trainers. We're not going to prescribe these very specific regimes, and I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life ever. And I see a theme with a lot of coaches. And again, this is a broad statement here. I know not every coach is like this, but there tends to be more directives on like, this is what you need to be doing, this is what you should be doing. And I think that's where some harm can be caused, because no one, in my opinion, has the right to be telling someone what to do. And that's a huge distinction, not to mention, of course, the years of education and study and like real practice through internships and practicums that you gain to earn a certain title. So it's complex.
So I think so social media can be helpful, also can be a detriment, I guess, depending on how you're using it and who you're maybe engaging with on social media. Understanding that typically if you're engaging in content or watching a lot of content that is associated with something that you're going through, or you're seeking therapy because of some challenges you have, all of it's kind of linked usually to some form of, trauma, right? Whether it's something recent or something that's happened a long time in life when you were little. Obviously, there's varying different degrees, right, of trauma. But what does, I guess, healing trauma look like? Is it's gone. I don't feel it. I don't experience it. I've forgotten about it, or I've turned that bad experience into a good experience, or is it not gone, but I've equipped myself with the tools to be able to work through that in a healthy way? What does healing trauma look like?
Yeah, it can be a bit of both, and I will start with saying that being healed is not a final form. There's no final healed state where there's no more work to be done. We always have things we can improve on and let go of. Life is literally just like attaching and releasing. So there's always things that we can release. So for someone to say, I'm healed, it's like, okay, not in general. However, you can heal from specific wounds, 100%. It doesn't mean they're all gone. It doesn't mean you can claim to be a healed person, because that's not really a real thing. But you can say, things that once really hurt me don't hurt me anymore. And that comes from doing the trauma work, doing the inner dialogue, usually with a trained professional, which also comes back to, if ever there's trauma-informed work being done, highly recommend doing that with a trained professional, because that's where damage can be done if the space isn't held appropriately. And also, that requires a lot of slowing down, and it's very delicate. So you want to make sure that the client feels resourced enough internally to go back to those memories, to go back to those experiences. I do a lot of inner child work, and I've seen it in clients. I've experienced it myself, where things that kind of ran my life, usually subconsciously, don't anymore. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other things that I can be like, oh, well, this thing's coming up for me, so maybe I'll go talk to my therapist about that one, right?
Do you think healing or personal development growth can become another addiction?
Yes.
Right?
Definitely.
Because I do feel like I see stuff on social, and it's constantly work on yourself. It's constantly moving from one to another. And it just feels like the people are constantly in a state of working through something versus living in the moment. Do you know what I mean? It's this addiction. Oh, now I have to heal this. I have to heal that. But it can become overwhelming. It can become like an addiction. There's always something, right? Kind of like social media addiction. They're addicted to healing, to post about the healing, to get the likes. I don't know.
I guess maybe it's a two-part question. Can it be an addiction? And if so, what about it makes it addicting?
Yeah. In my knee-jerk reaction you saw there is yes. I think that comes from witnessing, and also at one point kind of being in a space of, I'm not good enough as I am. I need to be better. I need to be the the most improved possible version of me, usually that mindset is tied to the idea that there is some healed version of me that I can achieve. And once I've achieved it, then I'll be happy. And that's a really dangerous mindset to have, and one that does get in the way of living in the now. And so I think that's when it kind of veers into, we could say, addictive territory, because you're not able to feel enough as you are. We're still all just inherently enough just for existing as humans. Do we all have room to grow? 100%. But if somewhere along the way your worth is also tied to your growth, then that becomes like, my God, I can't rest until I've achieved this, the pinnacle version of me.
So what would be if someone's listening to this right now and they're starting to go, uh-oh, or aha, that might be me, right? What would be something or some things that they can immediately start to, reflect on or do to deal with that?
Yeah, well, I would say I'm going to kind of answer this as an IFS therapist. Internal family systems is something that informs a lot of my work. So someone who is in that kind of addicted to healing mindset, ironically, is not healing. They're operating from a part of them that is very focused on maybe being perfect or earning self-worth or feeling loved or feeling good enough. So ironically, I would say whatever quote unquote healing has been going on, maybe there needs to be a shift to working with a therapist that can work with that part of you who is so focused on healing. And if we can actually, heal that part that thinks it's a healer, maybe you can settle into just existing sometimes.
So stop focusing on healing, but then find somebody who can help you heal that non-healing part.
That is exactly it. It's a little bit meta. We need some help to help the part that thinks it's a healer, because it's not. It's trying, right, but it's actually hurting you.
Yeah. And the word resilience is being thrown around quite a bit. I'm resilient. I went through so much. What's the difference between resilience and simply becoming emotionally numb?
Yeah, resilience is the ability to go through hardship and come out. Instead of post-traumatic stress, you can have post-traumatic growth. So you can go through the situation, acknowledge it for what it was and how difficult it was and heartbreaking, or the grief that was associated with whatever the situation may be, and learn from it and grow from it and feel stronger because of it. And resilience is very important, especially when we talk about, say, child rearing and the early developmental years. It's so important to develop resilience, or stress becomes way too overwhelming. What resiliency is not is being basically apathetic to whatever's going on around. Like you're saying, that numbness, Bella, where you don't have to work on not having a feeling about it because you just don't have a feeling about it already. That's not growth. That's, again, we would say a part of you that is trying to protect you from feeling whatever the trauma was. Something bad happens, this protective part is like, nope, and puts a shield over you and says, you won't feel this. And this is shutting out part. And I think all of us can relate at times to having that. Some stronger than others. And it's unfortunately, just to go on a bit of a tangent, that is or has been regarded as strength, particularly for men, that, boys don't cry, be strong, keep it together. So that part that blocks out and numbs out gets praised a lot of the time.
Yeah, the disassociation.
How do you move through that? Because I find myself, we went through a thing a few years ago with the death of my father, or marriage almost falling apart. I feel like sometimes I do become emotionally numb when things arise. Right? So it's just like, oh my gosh, I feel nothing, right? Somebody could be saying something or doing something and I just feel nothing. How would you guide someone through that type of, because I had to go numb when I was reading the eulogy for my father, when I had to put my emotions aside when we're dealing with our children and their emotional struggles. How do you turn on the ticker? I always say, I'm in this moment, I flatlined. There's zero emotion. There's nothing. How do you get that heartbeat back during those moments?
Yeah. Well, first, I believe it's so important when we're talking about parts of us, and the part that shuts down and the part that kept you composed, we'll say, in certain circumstances, is to, if it feels authentic, extend gratitude for that part. Thank you for getting me through that hard experience. Thank you for allowing me to do what I needed to do in that moment. And that's the first step in starting to build a relationship with that part that shuts down. And then, the approach I would take with IFS would be then to understand, what is that part think it's protecting you from, and what is it worried might happen if you really felt the way that you want to feel. And that's when we start to learn and understand this is a trauma response of some sort. We want to integrate this part of you with the adult you now who is safe to feel. And she is going to be okay if she cries, right? But that there's a part that thinks that's not okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was a big thing for me when I was going to therapy. It's like, Bella, it's okay to cry. I'm like, don't tell me when to cry. I'm not going to cry now. Don't tell me what to do. I'm, composed. I'm resilient. I'm strong.
Independent woman.
Yeah.
Right? There is that identity. It's like letting go of that. Like, who am I going to be if not strong, resilient? I'm going to be weak and emotional, because we are also taught, don't be a girl, don't cry like a girl, right? Like there's all that. It's not just for men, but for women now, we're told to be and trained to be in our masculine energy a lot of the time, that we don't need men. We can do all of it by ourselves. Sure, we can. And do we want to? Is that where the space we want to be in? And I feel a lot of the relationships are struggling now because there is that fight between two masculine energies where we're not in our softness. We're not in our, in the nature of nurture. We're in our flight, because that's what we're conditioned with social media and, that whole strong independent. Sure, I can be that. And I need him to open the jar of pickles for me when I can't open the jar of pickles.
So relatable. Yes, I love that you bring attention to that. I think the masculine, feminine energy is a conversation that does deserve more of a platform. So I love that there it is a bit of a crisis that women find themselves in, to soften into that. And also then for the man to feel so good being able to receive her that way, and how that can really deepen a bond. But we do live in a culture where there is quite a lot of pushback on, a very feminine woman is anti-feminist. And it's like, okay, this is now becoming political almost.
Yeah.
It's true. It's like, even setting up a marriage, people say, make sure you have your own bank account. Sure. But it's already setting you up for that division, that, putting that seed, this will fail. So make sure you are taking care of yourself, because this will fail statistically and so on and so forth. But we're being conditioned in that thinking, right? Because when you're going into marriage, you're not going in with the idea of failure.
Or at least you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And
shouldn't be. What's maybe one of the most important things for people to be thinking about when we're talking about masculine and feminine energy, right? Whether it's somebody listening in a relationship now, or even just somebody who's looking to get into a relationship, because I do think it's an important topic. We just kind of skipped over it a bit, but this dynamic between masculinity and femininity and having a harmony. I don't want to call it a balance, but a harmony in this, because there's a time. I think there's a time for women to be in their masculine, but if you're there too long, it becomes unhealthy, potentially toxic. Same thing for men. I think men tapping into their femininity is that way of breaking that disassociation that we get associated with or conditioned to be from a young age, right? So being able to, actually connect with ourselves and get emotional is really important. And I think the access to that is through more of a feminine energy than a masculine energy.
I would very much agree with that. When we look at dating today, for example, there's quite a lot of women, I would say majority of women, looking for a man who is not afraid to show his emotions. And that's a man who's okay to be in touch with that feminine energy. And ironically, that is perceived as a man who is more confident in his masculinity. So they reinforce each other 100%. Women will say, that's a real man. right? A real man will cry. It's like, great. We need to reinforce that so that we can also raise, young men now to be okay being chivalrous or being okay to be vulnerable and extend themselves in that way versus, no, that's not cool if I'm doing that, or that's, I'm risking getting hurt if I'm putting myself out there in that way. And I would say that's also a defense that a lot of women hold to, just to speak to Bella's point around staying in the masculine energy as a woman. That blocks you from asking for help, that blocks you from acknowledging that a lot of beautiful growth can happen in partnership. When we say things, I don't need you. It's not about needing, it's about nurturing, and so much growth can happen in partnership.
And what could you add, I guess, around boundaries? Because now I'm just really thinking about at what point, you hear from women like, I want to be led, right? I want a man who can lead me. Well, what point does too much of leading become dominating? That can drive, an unhealthy, toxic relationship. And how does boundaries fit in there? And then on the other end, with men, how does, trying to be more feminine, how do you create some boundaries where all of a sudden that doesn't, you become a pushover? And then all of a sudden that's not attractive to women either.
Yeah. Definitely a good question for the guys out there that are dating, that are struggling with these mixed messages, for sure, right? How do I be a man, but then also be soft, but be hard, but be cool, but be, not so rigid, and it's confusing 100%. So when we talk about leading versus being dominating, that's the difference basically between seeing the woman you're with and wanting to know her and wanting to give her space to be who she is and hold her up and prop her up in her feminine energy and be okay with that she's her own person, she has her own values, and I can hold you basically as that. Domineering is like this. It goes from like holding to like crushing is what I imagine. So holding to no, like your voice is silenced now. It's all about my voice, and your opinions are silenced now because they don't matter. And that's not leading at all. We can talk about, it just reminds me of leadership in general, right? When we talk about any type of leader, whether it's a country, a company, anything, someone who's going to say, no, the opinions of others or of my partner needs to be silenced so that my voice can be loudest, is not a leader.
I think a lot of it comes to when we come into relationship, there's this romanticized way of Disney has taught us the man will come and save us on a white horse and he'll know all the answers. And we're leaving the men to guess exactly what it is that we need, what we want. And I feel like if we just communicated, this is what I need from you, even during conflict, or if I come and let's say I want to vent, I can say, hey, babe, I just need you to listen. I don't need your advice or whatever. I just need to vent. And I need you to say, I hear you, and hold me, right? It's okay to say these things versus having your partner guess. And then if they don't show up the way you want them to show up, you hold resentment. They don't know me. Well, how are we supposed to know each other if we don't say what it is that we need? I feel communication is key. And dropping this, they should just know piece in quotation, right? How am I? I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what you need in this moment. If you tell me, I can guess. Maybe I'll show up the way you want me to. Maybe I won't. But if you don't tell me how you need my support, like what type of support you need from me at this particular moment, you're setting yourself up and your relationship for failure and resentment. Not right away, but
yeah, I think that's we mentioned earlier in the episode here the importance of mindfulness, and there's different ways of being able to be mindful in those moments of conflict. I always think breath work is so important because it really helps you lower your heart rate. And when our heart rate is like 95, 100 beats per minute and higher, we get into fight or flight, and it's really hard to start to provide a different perspective on being reflective in those moments and saying, oh, what do I need right now? Right. Or if you're on the receiving end, being like, oh, I wonder what need isn't being filled right now. Usually you're in the, how do I defend myself? How do I go on the offensive? And being able to recognize what's happening, potentially take a time out just for, even if it's for 30 minutes with a commitment to come back to the conversation, but practicing I use 4-box breathing to slow it down and be able to say, okay, now I'm out of it. I can ask the question now. Hey, babe, what? I hear you. I understand what you're saying. What do you need from me right now? Because I know the default for me always was not just how do I fix it? How do I resolve the conflict? Which doesn't necessarily resolve why we're having the conflict. So it's what can I say or do to then bring the emotion back to normal? Crack a joke or maybe say some things. And sometimes, hey, that helps. It's necessary. It's a way of repairing. But when it becomes the default coping mechanism, it doesn't bring you any closer to resolving the conflict in such a way where it doesn't occur again in the future. And so, yeah, I think being able to ask those questions, right? When someone's in that moment, not waiting for them to tell you, but also letting the person on both sides, not just from the female, but from the male as well, to be able to say, hey, this is what I need from you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think asking that question, it's just reminding me of the latter half of your question before, Lee, around what about a man who maybe leans towards being too passive versus domineering? That man that maybe is leaning towards passivity, that's a beautiful opportunity for them to pause, get curious about their needs instead of always putting the needs of their partner first, and then having the courage to ask that to be met, to say, this is what I'm feeling I need from you. And then it's, of course, up to the partner to be okay with this ask, because they probably wouldn't be used to that if he's very passive and not expressing needs.
Yeah, it's in the listening. When you're having a conversation, you always say, listen to understand. Right?
Not listen to respond.
Not listen to respond, because we do listen to respond majority of the time. But once you train that muscle to listen to understand, then it changes the dynamics, changes the conversation, and changes how you repair and move forward in the relationship. Okay, on this note, final question. What do you believe is the one conversation we're not having as a society that we desperately need to start?
Yeah, my mind goes straight to something that's come up today, which is we do need to take a proactive approach to mental health on an individual level and in partnership and in families. And although there is, speaking of social media, a lot of talk about this, we need to see more action. I'd like to think somewhere down the line, psychotherapy is covered the way going to see your family doctor is covered, and that there's a conversation around mental health that looks more like, oh yeah, like I'm going to see my therapist next week, and there's a casualness to it, the same way that there would be saying I'm going to see my doctor or I'm going to see the dentist. And that's something that is starting to happen, but there's quite a lot of room for growth there, and that's going to affect systems. There's going to need to be big systems changes there, and it's exciting. I hope to see it in my lifetime, and I hope to be a part of it.
I couldn't agree more. I think, like you said, we go see our family doctors for checkups. We go see dentists to prevent cavities from happening, but we don't go see therapists to prevent, a cavity of the mind from occurring. And we wait way too long. And although, like you said, we have the ability to be able to heal and recover and not just get back to whatever baseline we think we need to get back to, but actually surpass that and grow and develop sometimes into versions of ourselves that we never thought were possible. We can do it early in such a way where we're not causing, other sources of suffering from needing to occur. We can avoid that if we get ahead of it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kirsten, for coming on and having this conversation. I think it is very much needed. The more we talk about it, the more we normalize these types of things and get us closer to that step of I'm just going to my therapist as going to the doctors or dentist. So thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find you?
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. It's been so fun and very important conversations to be had. People can find me most easily through my website, which is mindthegapsplural.co. You can access my social media, community engagement, and Psychology Today articles. Also, my podcast is available through there.
Awesome. Well, I hope that the listeners have taken a lot away. I've taken a few things away from this conversation, but I think one big thing that hasn't quite been said, but I think it's kind of underlined, is that if you're going to see therapy or you need to see therapy, it doesn't mean something's wrong with you, right? this is a feature of being human. It's not a bug, right? There will always be things that are, we need to release, like you said, attach and release. There'll always be things in our life. Every single human being goes through this. And so if there's anything you take away, I think the biggest number one thing is going and seeing a therapist doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's actually one of the best ways to achieve the better versions of yourself. So,
go get that upgrade.
Go get that upgrade. That's right.
System upgrade, I say.
Yeah.
We
System
upgrade all our
upgrade.
technology,
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to name too along the lines of that metaphor. I'm thinking of, my philosophy and my work is therapy is about unbecoming all the things that you're not rather than becoming this thing that you should be. Like we inherently have that, software. I don't know if we call it an upgrade, but we inherently have that bug-free system. And so it's about getting back to that bug-free system. And that is a huge, huge upgrade in and of itself.
Love that. Thank you, Kirsten.
Until
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Let's Not Sugarcoat It. Now, if this conversation challenged you, made you think, or gave you a new perspective, don't let it end here.
Remember, you don't have to agree with every conversation. You just have to be willing to have one, because the conversations we avoid are often the ones that matter most.
Share this episode with someone who'll challenge your thinking. Start the conversation, ask the uncomfortable question, but most importantly, listen with curiosity. And if you believe we need more conversations like this, follow the show and leave us a review. Helps us reach more people who are looking for honest conversations in a world full of noise.
The goal was never to tell you what you think.
It was to give you something worth thinking about.
Until next time, stay curious, keep asking better questions, and let's not sugarcoat it.